Good morning, it's Frugal here. As always, I have my coffee because otherwise somebody might just get killed. So today we're going to talk about, do I really need insurance? And if so, what insurance? Now, if you think that was a leading phrase, well, not quite, hey. You don't actually need insurance. If your emergency fund can cover all of the risks involved in your life, then you technically actually don't need insurance. Sadly, like most people don't have that size of emergency fund, and that basically breaks them. So I want to go today into a little bit talk about emergency funds, talking about risk, talking about insurance a little bit, just so that we've got a better understanding about the world that we're living in and the things that we need to consider, just so that we're not financially ruined, right? So let's start with emergency funds. So emergency funds, that is a form of risk mitigation, which is a very fancy word to say that if something would happen, that you would be okay. Now, in the short run, that would be something like a burst geyser. It might be an emergency that happened, like you desperately need to go to, to a doctor, and your medical aid doesn't necessarily cover that. So if you've got something like your car broke down, then you'd basically go and say like, okay, I'm taking my money from my emergency fund, and I'm using that money for the purpose of this emergency. Now, the fact is that many people don't actually have an emergency fund. Now, if you don't have an emergency fund, you're going to have to dig into your credit card, pay a lot of debt on that, interest on that, and a lot of stuff that's going to just go south from there. And if the emergency goes even bigger, it's going to be more problematic. Now, let's go take that step back. Emergency funds. What do you need to have an okay emergency fund? Well, I suggest 3 months worth of expenses. So if your expenses are 10,000 Rand a month, you need 30,000 Rand a month somewhere safe that you can access within 48 hours. I do not recommend putting that into your current account, into your check account, because we tend to use money that we see is available. So don't do that. Rather put it maybe either in your bond, where you save on interest, or in an interest-bearing account, which you can access within 48 hours. Now, many people say that you can use your credit card. Well, some credit cards do allow for a little bit of space when it comes to interest rates. Many do not. Would I take the risk? I would not, because I am risk averse and I do not like having debt because I don't want to use tomorrow's money to pay for today's things. So this is the thing for me then. So if you are self-employed, if you are a freelancer or contractor, your emergency funds are probably going to have to be pushed up quite a lot. What we've learned recently is that, after the last 2 years, we realized that we need a larger emergency fund because of lockdowns, as well as retrenchments, redundancies, crises, things that happen, family members that desperately need money, deaths in the family and you need to travel quite far, things that really are unforeseen. Now, this is now for general emergencies, right? But obviously there are other risks as well that we do need to consider. Something like my coffee running out. That is a huge problem, right? But it's not an emergency. It might be for me, but not for you, right? But again, I make sure in my budget I've got a little bit of money that I do keep for that coffee running out. On the other hand, if you do have other emergencies or other things that could go wrong, you need to make sure that you're prepared for that. So let's check off a couple of those things that could go wrong that you just need to be aware of. So number one, your health. Things can go wrong with your health. If you are going that route, I'd suggest, looking at a medical aid as well as gap cover. Gap cover basically covers in between your medical aid and what the doctor charges. Now, normally there's a little fee involved. With Frugal Junior here, we've realized that the doctor charges this much and the medical aid pays this much. And so for that extra piece, we're just going to have to then go and say, well, gap cover would need to cover that. So concerning medical as well, you can get like dread and disease cover. That'll cover any diseases and things that you might have. That is an insurance policy, so you pay a monthly fee, and if something happens to you with regards to their prescribed diseases that they do cover, then they will actually pay you out a lump sum of money. Remember, it is dread disease, which means it's terrible diseases. And if they do pay out, the chance of you ever getting dread disease cover is basically zero. Or they're going to charge you a small fortune for that, because obviously you've had a very, very serious disease that basically is either life-threatening or you are going to die, which might be something like a severe stage of metastasized cancer or something like that. You also get, now that's concerning like the more healthy part, right? Now you also get things like life cover, and that is more for people that want to make sure that the people, once they're not here anymore, that their family members are going to be okay. So that would be something like, that's number 2, right? So that would be something like, you've got properties that you want to pay off. The bank forces you to take out life cover for that. It does happen, and the bank will then basically say, unless you get that life cover, we're not going to actually do that. Now, for this type of cover, it's generally not exceptionally expensive depending on the options that you take and the amount that you take. But if you do die, your family members or whoever you've appointed to say that this person should get the money will get that amount of money, and hopefully they will be okay, right? But again, part of this, is not just about the money part. There's also part of saying, well, if I would die, I want my wife to be able to still work, to be able to fit into society, and not just be able to be like, well, I'm just sponging off the life money, insurance money that I've got. I wouldn't want that. I'd love her to fit back into society. So as part of covering and risk, I highly recommend having a plan like that in place, so that your other half or whoever the person is will be able to function in society and not just live off of that money. Okay, then, like we've talked about medical, we've talked about dread disease cover, we've talked about life insurance. We also get policies for your income, right? Income security. So what can happen is that your income can go south. Things can go, for example, get retrenched. You can get made redundant. Your job could become obsolete. You could not actually bring in any income for a very long time. And for all of those things, there are certain policies that you can get. So some of these policies include things like retrenchment cover, which is very, very hard to come by in South Africa at the moment. Give it a couple of years and it's going to be all normal again. You're going to get business interruption insurance, which would be things like you can't do business as normal due to certain factors such as pandemics or like issues in the country, earthquakes, hurricanes, all of those type of things that stops you from doing business. That's more on the business side. On the personal side, like I said, retrenchment cover, you can get income protectors. There are tons of those things out there, and they've all got their own T's and C's. I highly recommend reading those T's and C's, because it is not as simple as drinking a cup of coffee. You are going to probably have to prove to them, give them years of paperwork and all of those other things. Another one that you can consider is UIF. So if you were retrenched or you do not have a job, or you get pregnant, if you are female and pregnant, not male and pregnant, because they kind of start asking questions, then you can actually claim UIF as well. That is a fee that we pay to the government as insurance for our jobs. So in that cases, what can happen is you can actually claim for that. It is good that you make sure that your income is protected. As part of that, I do like having an emergency fund in that. So for 3 months, if you are in a low risk job environment, something like a software developer or an engineer that can get a job within a week, then it's not necessarily that important. Having said that, if you are in the higher tax bracket or the higher income bracket, then it does become a little bit more risky and more difficult on getting a new job. Or if you're in an environment where every second person does what you do, things like graphic designers, things like a domestic help, something like working at your local supermarket. Those people can, there's a job a dime a dozen. So those are very, very high risk. Now, start saving for that emergency fund, right? I highly recommend that. There are other risks as well that you can have as well. A family member passing away, a family member getting in trouble, and all of these things we need to make sure that we cover, right? We need to make sure, for example, if we get a break-in at our house, that we're going to be okay. That if they literally take away everything in the house, that you'd be able to be okay. If you do have an emergency fund, you don't need insurance. So for example, if you are insuring your wedding ring and you know your emergency fund will cover that wedding ring, you do not need to insure that. Could you? Or, absolutely you could. Should you? Well, yes, you can if you want to. But it's not necessary if your emergency fund will cover those expenses. So, we've looked at a couple of things, right? We've looked at emergency funds. We've looked at medical insurance, medical aid. We looked at gap cover. We just mentioned that briefly. We looked at things like, if you would die, funeral cover. We've mentioned that briefly. We've looked at things like short-term insurance, such as things like for your car and your house. Obviously, like if somebody bumps into your car or you bump into somebody's Ferrari, you're going to be in trouble. So we've covered quite a lot of things with regards to insurance, thinking about those things and just making sure that you are covered if something does happen. Now that you know a little bit more about insurance risk and just covering yourself in case something bad happens, have a wonderful day. Happy investing.